Hey, everybody. I'll pick up with, I believe this is chapters, the rest of chapter 6. So part 2 of chapter 6, which is out of the frying pan and into the fire. So here we go. What is all this uproar in the forest tonight? Said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting back in the moonlight on the top of a lonely pinnacle of rock at the eastern edge of the mountains. I hear wolves' voices. Are the goblins at mischief in the woods? He swept up into the air, and immediately 2 of his guards from the rocks at either hand leapt up to follow him. They circled up in the sky and looked down upon the ring of wargs, a tiny spot far, far below. But eagles have keen eyes and can see small things at a great distance. The Lord of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes that could look at the sun unblinking and could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in the moonlight. So though he could not see the people in the trees, he could make out the commotion among the wolves and see the tiny flashes of fire and hear the howling and yelping come up faint from far beneath him. Also, he could see a glint of the moon on goblin spears and helmets as long lines of the wicked folk crept down the hillsides from their gate and wound into the wood. Eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel. But the ancient race of the northern mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins or fear them. When they took any notice of them at all, which was seldom, they did not eat such creatures. They swooped on them and drove them shrieking back into their caves and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated the eagles, feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats or drive them from the mountains. Tonight, the Lord of Eagles was filled with curiosity to know what was afoot. So he summoned many other eagles to him, and they flew away from the mountains and slowly circling, ever round and round, they came down towards the ring of wolves and the meeting place of the goblins. A very good thing, too. Dreadful things had been going on down there, and the wolves that had caught fire and fled into the forest had set it alight in several places. It was high summer, and on the eastern side of the mountain there had been little rain for some time. Yellowing bracken, fallen branches, deep piled pine needles, and here and there dead trees were soon in flames. All around the clearing of the wargs fire was leaping, but the wolf guards did not leave the trees. Maddened and angry, they were leaping, howling around the trunks and cursing the dwarves in their horrible language, with their tongues hanging out and their eyes shining as red and fierce as the flames. And suddenly, goblins came running up yelling, and they thought a battle with the woodmen was going on, but soon they learned what had really happened. Some of them actually sat down and laughed. Others waved their spears and clashed the shafts against their shields. Goblins are not afraid of fire, and they soon had a plan which seemed to them most amusing. Some got all the wolves together in a pack, and some stacked fern and brushwood around the tree trunks. Others rushed round and stamped and beat and stamped until nearly all the flames were put out. But they didn't put out the fire nearest to the trees where the dwarves were. That fire they fed with leaves and dead branches and bracken, and soon they had a ring of smoke and flames all around in the dwarves, and the ring which they kept from spreading outward. But it closed slowly in till the running fire was licking the fuel piled under the trees. Smoke was in Bilbo's eyes, and he could feel the heat of the flames. And through the reek, he could see the goblins dancing round and round in a circle like people round a midsummer bonfire. Outside, the ring of dancing warriors with spears and axes stood the wolves at a respectable distance, watching and waiting. He could hear the goblins beginning a horrible song. 15 birds in 5 fir trees. Their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze, but funny little birds, they had no wings. Oh, what shall we do with the funny little things? Roast them alive or stew them in a pot, fry them, boil them, and eat them hot. They stopped and shouted out. Then they stopped and shouted out, "Fly away, little birds, fly away if you can. Come down, little birds, or you can get roasted in your nests. Sing, sing, little birds. Why don't you sing?" "Go away, little boys," shouted Gandalf in answer. "It isn't bird nesting time. Also, naughty little boys that play with fire get punished." He said it to make them angry and to show them he was not frightened of them, though of course he was. Wizard though he was. They took no notice, and they went on singing. "Burn, burn, tree and fern, shrivel and scorch, a fizzling torch to light the night for our delight. Ya hey! Bake and toast 'em, fry and roast 'em, till beards blaze and eyes glaze, till hair smells and skins crack, fat melts and bones black, and cinders lie beneath the sky. So dwarves shall die, and light the night for our delight. Ya hey, ya harry hey, ya hoy." With that yahoy, the flames were under Gandalf's tree. In a moment, it spread to the others. The bark caught fire, and the lower branches cracked. Then Gandalf climbed to the top of this tree. Sudden splendor flashed from his wand like lightning as he got ready to spring down from on high among the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end of him, though he would probably have killed many of them as he came hurtling down like a thunderbolt. But he never leaped. Just that moment, the Lord of the Eagles swept down from above and seized him with his talons and was gone. There was a howl of anger and surprise from the goblins. Loud cried the Lord of the Eagles, to whom Gandalf had now spoken. Back swept the great birds that were with him, and down they came like huge black shadows. The wolves yammered and gnashed their teeth. The goblins yelled and stamped with rage and flung their heavy spears in the air in vain. Over them swooped the eagles. The dark rush of their beating wings smote them to the floor or drove them far away, and their talons tore at goblin faces. Other birds flew to the treetops and seized the dwarves, who were scrambling up now as far as they ever dared go. Poor little Bilbo was very nearly left behind again. He just managed to catch hold of Dory's legs, and Dory was borne off last of all. And up they went together above the tumult and the burning, Bilbo swinging in the air with his arms nearly breaking. Now far below, the goblins and the wolves were scattering far and wide in the woods. A few eagles were still circling and sweeping above the battleground. The flames about the trees sprang suddenly up above the highest branches, and they went up in crackling fire. There was a sudden flurry of sparks and smoke, and Bilbo had escaped only just in time. Soon, the light of the burning was faint below, a red twinkle on the black floor, and they were high up in the sky. rising all the time in strong sweeping circles. Bilbo never forgot that flight, clinging onto Dory's ankles. He moaned, my arms, but Dory groaned, my poor legs, my poor legs. At the best of times, heights made Bilbo giddy. He used to turn queer if he looked over the edge of quite a little cliff, and he had never liked ladders, let alone trees, never having had to escape from wolves before. So you can imagine how his head swam now. And he looked down between the dangling toes and saw the dark lands opening wide underneath him, touched here and there with the light of the moon on a hillside rock or a stream in the plains. The pale peaks of the mountains were coming nearer, moonlit spikes of rock sticking out of black shadows. Summer or not, it seemed very cold. He shut his eyes and wondered if he could hold on any longer. Then he imagined what would happen if he did not, and he felt sick. The flight ended only just in time for him, just before his arms gave way. He loosed Dory's ankles with a gasp and fell into a rough platform of the Eagle's eyrie. There he lay without speaking, and his thoughts were a mixture of surprise at being saved from the fire and fear lest he fall off that narrow piece into the deep shadows on either side. He was feeling very queer indeed in the head by this time, after the dreadful adventures of the last 3 days, with next to nothing to eat. He found himself saying aloud, now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it is suddenly picked out of the pan with a fork and put onto the shelf. So here's the drawing of the Misty Mountains looking west from the eyrie towards the Goblins' Gate. So there you go. I'd like to show you the picture. No, you don't, he heard Dory answering, because bacon knows that it will be back in the pan sooner. Oh, excuse me. Apparently reading's making me sleepy. Sooner or later. And it is to be hoped we shan't. Also, eagles aren't forks. Oh no, not a bit like storks. Forks, I mean, said Bilbo, sitting up and looking anxiously at the eagle, who was perched close by. He wondered what other nonsense he had been saying, and if the eagle would think it rude. You ought not to be rude to an eagle when you are only the size of a hobbit and are up in his eyrie at night. The eagle only sharpened his beak on the stone and trimmed his feathers and took no notice. Soon another eagle flew up. The Lord of the Eagles bids you bring your prisoners to the great shelf, he cried, and was off again. The other seized Dory with his claws and flew away with him into the night, leaving Bilbo all alone. He had just strength to wonder what the messenger had meant by prisoners, and to begin to think of being torn up for supper like a rabbit when his own turn came. The eagle came back and seized him with his talons by the back of his coat and swooped off. This time he flew only a short way. Very soon Bilbo was laid down, trembling with fear, on a wide shelf of rock on the mountainside, and there was no path down on it to save by flying, and no path down off except by jumping over the precipice. There he found all the others sitting with their backs to the mountain wall. The Lord of the Eagles also was there and was speaking to Gandalf. It seemed that Bilbo was not going to be eaten after all. The wizard and the eagle lord appeared to know one another slightly and even to be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had often been in the mountains, had at once rendered a service to the eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. So you see, prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only, and not captives of the eagles. Also, Bilbo listened to the talk of Gandalf and realized that at last they were going to escape, really and truly, from the dreadful mountains. He was discussing plans with the great eagle for carrying the dwarves and himself and Bilbo far away and setting them down well on their journey across the plains below. The Lord of the Eagles would not take them anywhere near where men lived. They would shoot at us, their great bows of yew, he said, for they would think they were after their sheep. And at other times they would be right. No. We are glad to cheat the goblins of their sport, and we are glad to repay our thanks to you, but we will not risk ourselves for dwarves in the southward lands. Very well, said Gandalf. Take us where and as far as you will. We are already deeply obliged to you, but in the meantime, we are famished with hunger. I am nearly dead of it, said Bilbo in a weak little voice that nobody heard. That can perhaps be mended, said the Lord of the Eagles. Later on, you might have seen a bright fire on the shelf of the rock and figures of the dwarves round it cooking and making a fine roasting smell. The eagles had brought up dry boughs for fuel, and they had brought rabbits, hares, and a small sheep. And the dwarves managed all the preparations. Bilbo was too weak to help. And anyway, he was not much good at skinning rabbits and cutting up meat, being used to having its delivered by the butcher, all ready to cook. Gandalf, too, was lying down after doing his part in setting the fire going, since Oin and Gloin had lost their tinder boxes. Dwarves have never taken to matches, even still. So ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains, and soon Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he felt he could sleep contentedly, though really he would have liked a loaf and butter better than bits of meat toasted on sticks. He slept curled up on the hard rock and soundly, and more soundly than ever he had done on his feather bed in his little hole at home. But all night he dreamed of his own house and wandered in his sleep into all the different rooms, looking for something that he could not find nor remember what it looked like. So I'll stop there for today. That completes chapter 6, and I'll pick up next time with the beginning of chapter 7, entitled Queer Lodgings. So see you next time.